think at least everyone can remember the picture of Alain Kurdi, the 3-year-old kid who washed up on a beach in Turkey. That was sort of the catalyst of this whole thing that got people on board with, the next day in Europe you could see refugees welcome, people putting a lot of pressure on their government to bring more refugees in. We're expecting to see a lot of women and elderly and children coming into our countries, but what we got was something very different. What we got was a lot of young men, especially young men of fighting age, coming into our country. Depending on what point of entry you look at, at least in Germany, close to 2/3 of these people are not even from Syria. Close to 70% of these people are actually young men. And I think if we're arguing for a humanitarian crisis or arguing that we're saving refugees, my argument would be, where are the women, where are the children, and where are the elderly? I mean, you imagine during World War II that all the young British men during the war would flee to another country and leave all their women and children behind to fight the war. I can't really imagine that. What we've all concentrated on tonight, like I said, is mainly the definition, but also the question. Why the West? Why not Russia? Why not China? Why not India? Why is the sole purpose on the West to... Thank you. There's another point I'll make is that, in Europe we are very compassionate. We are very hospitable. It's one of the great things about our country. I'm a British citizen, but I was born in South Africa and I did immigrate here. And I do think it's one of the great things about our country. But what I will argue is there's something that's very precious. And if we keep pushing it and we keep inviting people from countries people who are not escaping from war, people are going to become suspicious, and I don't want that. As someone who came here as an immigrant, we want people to trust immigrants, we want people to have faith in immigrants, and if we're inviting people who are not who they say they are, then I would argue that that's going to essentially make people very distrusting of the people coming into the country. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Second up, arguing for the motion, the West should take in more refugees, Elena Wood. She's from Elena Wood. Elena Wood. Let's do it again. Elena Wood. Elena Wood. Elena Wood is from Nevada and has a keen interest in international development and cultural anthropology after her trip to Rwanda. Round of applause for Elena.
So with increased conflict and war breaking out all over the world, we are facing the largest refugee crisis in history. I'm a little more saucy. According to a 2015 global report by UN refugee agencies, there are currently well over 20 million refugees worldwide. That's not even including those who are living displaced in refugee camps, which that number is 65 million. This equates to a staggering rate of 34,000 people per day, or 24 people per minute. Over 50% of this population is made up of children under the age of 18, many of whom are applying for asylum, unaccompanied by adults or family members. And the percentage of women versus men, 48% women and 52% men, roughly, give or take. So, however, while we are seeing a record increase of vulnerable people in need of asylum and refuge, for some reason we're also seeing a sharp decline in acceptance of countries offering such refuge. The U.S. in particular only resettled approximately 70,000 refugees in the 2015 fiscal year, which compared to a study in 1980 where they were accepting 250,000 a year, versus also after the Vietnam War where they were accepting anywhere from 500,000 Vietnamese refugees. So why the decline? Why the change of heart? What has contributed to this change of heart? For one, the issue has become caught up in this partisan tug of war on immigration policy. which leads to some people asking, where are the economic benefits of us allowing refugees into our country? Well, it seems like kind of a arbitrary question when faced with the stark reality that these people are fleeing for their lives. Another contributing factor to the overall decrease of refugee acceptance is the change in perception of refugees from vulnerable to threatening after such cases of 9/11. So in my argument, I aim to address and debunk many claims of the negative economic and social impacts of refugees. I aim to prove that ultimately acceptance as well as integration into society, into our Western countries, will have a mutual positive impact economically and socially on both the host culture, the host country, and on the refugees. So I will address issues such as the economic, so the difference in cost between military intervention versus resettlement. And I will also address the economic impact and positive contribution that refugees can make on society, as well as addressing and debunking the claims that many of these refugees are dangerous or terrorists, where in all actuality, less refugees are likely to be incarcerated in public and into our prisons than national board citizens. So I will be addressing that later, and thank you.
Thank you. Next up, arguing against the motion, the West should take in more refugees. We have Alan Eyre. He is British. He is definitely British. He got his first job when he was 4 years old, and he plans to bring suitable drinking water to everyone, everywhere. Round of applause.
Yeah, nice to see you all tonight. With the first slide there, I'm going to touch on 3 points here. The first is that many wealthy nations have not recognise refugee status. Second point is there is no legal status as a refugee, and no nation is obliged to take a refugee. The third point is that refugee status is being misused by many. First point is that why should the West take in more refugees when there are many nations out there that have the financial capacity to deal with people, to house them, to give them food and water, the basic life sources that we need. So the West should definitely not take any more refugees. Well, this sort of conditions going on, well, other people turn their back. Why should other people open their doors while other people shut their doors? The closest thing to a legal document as a refugee status is in the Geneva Convention, which states it recognises refugee rights which are to be applied without discrimination as to race, religion or country of origin. The UK, for example, a person is officially a refugee when they have their claim for asylum accepted, meaning that a refugee doesn't have a status, they are in kind of no man's land. Angela Merkel invited refugees to come to Germany, but that was a big political boo-hoo for her, because it is the only time that she invited refugees into Germany, and it gave the perception that the doors were open, when actually the doors are not open, the doors are closed all throughout the Western world to refugees. There is no open door policy. There are no legal status to refugees. So we will hit that picture there. Now, a point looking at this region that we have, a refugee can come from anywhere. A refugee can come from Mexico. A refugee can come from Scotland if he feels persecuted, that he believes that the English government is bullshit. Which I can be a refugee. We're focusing in this region here, where we're looking at Shiites and Sunnis. And this is the main point, what we're focusing on. Because in Syria, they are largely Shiite, and the areas that are not taking any refugees are Sunni. They are under persecution, and this is where a lot of the war zones are, especially in Iraq. Now we're focusing in Syria at the moment. The people are not coming down, they're getting moved out because they are under persecution under their own religious beliefs. There are many Christians in Syria. There were 3 million Christians in Syria before the war. Now there's roughly 2.5 million Christians there. So it's not coming down to religious beliefs. It's coming down to the fact of bringing people in. Getting lost here, don't bear with me. 30 seconds to go. Now, what is a religious fanatical? The religious fanaticals are not coming for Syria or Iraq. These are mainly where the refugees are coming from. We could look at the US State Department estimates that the Saudi Arabian government has spent $10 billion to fund charitable foundations that replace mainstream Sunni Islam with harsh intolerance called Wahhabism. We're running out. Closing it, for the reason that I just mentioned, the West should not be promote or taking even any one more refugee than they already have due to the social and safety responsibilities of their governed nations. Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
And finally, arguing for the motion, the West should take in more refugees. Let's get that page back on. We have David Peterson. He is a public speaking and debate coach at Learning Leaders. He is the father of 2 beautiful babies, one of which I think is here tonight, or was here earlier, and has the coolest wife in Shanghai. David.
All right, so I prepared some responses to arguments that would be made by the opposition side, and since we have yet to hear any, I'll just talk about what we've said and go through the things that they've said. So, what have you heard? There is a refugee crisis in the world. They want to obfuscate the situation and make it seem as if anybody can claim to be a refugee. If you're from Scotland, you can claim to refugee and gain status in any country. Look, does anybody here deny that there's a refugee crisis, that it's unprecedented, that it hasn't been to this proportion since the World War II era? Nobody would deny that in any reasonable way. So this debate is not about defining what is and is not a refugee. If you disagree and deny that there's a refugee crisis, this isn't the debate for you to be in. All reasonable people would agree that that crisis exists, and if we disagree about the definition, that's almost really a secondary point. Once we agree on who is a refugee, and we can all agree that there are some, let them in. And the second part of what we're saying, and which they're not addressing whatsoever, is the fact that the refugee crisis was created by Western policies in specific. So, they don't address one word about this, but you have to look back to the fall of the Ottoman Empire, right after the end of World War I, and the Sykes-Picot Agreement that led to the British and the French dividing up the Middle East like a 20-sack and exploiting the oil resources for themselves. The Western policies toward the entire region of the Middle East have never been about anything that's reasonable or humane for the people. It's always been about exploiting the resources of these regions. That's the policies of the West toward the Middle East. Most recently, you can only look at the disastrous invasion of Iraq with zero plan in place that was set in place by someone I know a lot of you here are fond of, George W. Bush, that led to the complete chaos. You had the Ba'athist Party completely taken out of power, a complete power vacuum that led to the growth and the creation of this group that we now call ISIS, and we're pretending is the worst, most dangerous thing that we've ever heard of, and we're washing our hands of all responsibility and accountability. The refugee crisis that you all can deny that it exists, but I think most thinking people wouldn't, is caused by Western policies. So, to go to the question that the first speaker raised. Would anybody here, you're living in China, should China just kick you out of the country? Do you all have a right to be here? No, I guess none of us have a right to be here. But in order to make this contextual, we have to redefine it a little bit. Let's imagine that all of us come from a region of the world that China has been systematically fucking over for 100 years. And most recently, China has been bombing and took the existing power source out of our country and created a power vacuum where the lowest elements of society, the most fundamentalist, reactionary, backward elements, came to power and were locked in a power struggle with the government that, guess what, was put in power by China. Just as the United States and the West installed oppressive regimes throughout the Middle East, which gave rise to the Arab Spring. In that case, when our homes were war-torn, when we all know people and family members who have been killed and destroyed, and at the point that China says, oh, get out of here, we don't have a right to take you in. Hey, what's a refugee anyway? Next thing we know, the Japanese are going to be knocking on our doors claiming to be refugees. That's bullshit. China, in that case, yes, they should take us in. This isn't a debate about if we have a right to be here or the West is legally obligated to accept refugees. It's a question of fucking decency. Should the West accept refugees? And in this case, they're the most capable of averting a massive humanitarian catastrophe. That's the thing that they don't mention. We'll send them to the Middle East, send them to Saudi Arabia. Iraq and Afghanistan are really nice this time of year. Nobody here has vacation plans in Iraq and Afghanistan. They're war-torn regions. You never know when the next drone strike is going to come or ISIS is going to raid your village. They are absolutely delusional in this context, and just out of a basic sense of decency, the West should accept more refugees. They're not legally obligated, but just as a sense of decency. They have the capability.
Okay. And finally, thirdly, arguing against the motion the West should take in more refugees, we have Alex Brown, who is an artist with moderately liberal political views, who loves evidence and dislikes emotion. Alex.
Now that we've heard what this is not about, thank you very much. I will now tell you what it is about. You all came here to see this motion, okay? So let me bring it back to this motion. This team are proposing this motion. They have not suggested how this would happen. They've just said, feelings, emotions, everybody take these refugees in, okay? That's what they've proposed so far. What I'm going to do is suggest that actually what they're proposing isn't the most practical solution. And I think that we don't have to talk about things like terrorism so much, and we haven't actually talked about it too much. I'm sure it will come up later. I'm going to talk about something that's going on in Jordan at the moment that I think is a better practical solution to what's going on, okay? And it's something we believe in, certainly. I might then go on to summarise some of these guys' points. So the thing I'm going to talk about avoids Syrians having to go across the Mediterranean, avoids them, and not just Syrians, you know, other nationalities as well from war-torn countries. It will help them build their countries after the war. It helps other countries as well. And lastly, it does what refugees want, which is to have autonomy and be able to have independence for themselves, get a job and be able to save themselves. I think we can all agree that's what they want. That's not happening at the moment in Europe, and it's quite unfair on the people that are coming over because they think that's what's happening. It's not. So, in Jordan, over the last year, 2 economists went over to the government over there to help them consult on how to solve the crisis in Jordan. They've taken in, by the way, tons more than we have. Okay, and most of the problem is over there, in Jordan, in Turkey, and in Lebanon. Places around the war-torn countries. Now, what they've suggested and what they managed to do is essentially set up SEZs, safe economic zones, that can do trade with Europe, that can basically employ Syrians that have just come there as refugees, as well as Jordanians. So they've kind of made deals with the EU and big business and the World Bank to give them money in order to sort of generate economy. That to us, and certainly to me, is a great solution. 38,000 jobs have already been created by them doing that. Merkel has just gone to Ethiopia to try and do the same thing. Uganda is doing the same thing, but people are starting to do this now. It's a great solution. Because it means that once those people have got on their feet and once the war is over, they can move right back to their home country and rebuild Syria, let's say, for example. Okay? Now, with some of the things we've touched upon, things like we sort of mentioned where people are coming from and how to, whether you're a refugee or not, that's kind of been sort of blurred over a little bit. But one of the main points we would like to make is we don't know, and the migrant has been mentioned over here, refugees are what we're talking about. We're not talking about economic migrants who end up in Calais and often burn their passports to show you that they're not from Pakistan so they can pretend they're war refugees. That's the sort of thing that's happening, and we need to try and avoid that. And I'm saying by investing and by putting all of our efforts into places like Jordan, and it's now become called the Jordan model, which is a bit ironic for British people if you understand. It's become something called the Jordan model that they're trying to make happen elsewhere. All right? And that kind of for us is a pragmatic way of solving this. And it actually removes the emotional part of things as well. So if you kind of believe in that idea, definitely go away and research it, look into it. I know these guys haven't yet. Okay? Thank you very much for listening to us. We'll probably bring that up later on in the Q&A.
Thank you, Alex. All right, we just got started. So now we're into the all-out debating phase, which I will moderate. I've got some sections here which I'm going to guide us through, and we want your feedback, your questions, your comments, and the front runners will respond to each other, and I'll moderate it. There's a lot of you here, and there's got 6 front runners today. We usually have 4, so we've got a lot of stuff to get through. So I'm going to push everyone to be quite concise. If it's a question, make it concise. If it's a comment, make it concise. These guys are the stars, so you guys, we love your input, but keep it nice and concise. Alright, I will kick off. And then you guys put your hands up and we'll moderate it from there. Okay. Nice one. Web. I have a web. A planned web. Alright then, so first, let's just quickly agree on a few terms. I think both sides will vaguely agree on these terms. We've got West and refugees. So, the West, what do we define as the West? Do you want to throw some countries at me this side? The West is
Germany, UK, US, Canada, France, Australia, yeah, possibly Italy.
So, okay.
White people.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Native English speaking countries and some European countries, predominantly popularised by white people. And North America.
British Empire.
British Empire. Okay, that will do. That will do.
The West is Western Europe and North America. That's it.
Australia. What about Russia? New debate. We've got a vague consensus. We've got a vague consensus. That's a whole new debate. That's a whole new debate. We've got a whole new debate. All right. Refugees. Now I think we've got agreement here. We've got some disagreement about who exactly the people are coming from, crossing the border into Europe. But the actual term of refugee, I think we've got some agreement on. You both kind of agree. You agree what a refugee is. You may disagree on what is actually happening with the migrant crisis, refugee crisis, but you agree on what the term is. Okay, let's get into it. I heard both sides, at least I think I heard both sides, claim the economic argument for themselves. So I heard this side say that the refugees coming into Europe is good for the European economies. And they come in and presumably take low-skilled work that other people aren't prepared to do, and it boosts the economy. This side, does this side agree with that argument or refute it? So, who wants to refute it?
If you look at finance is an illusion. Money isn't actually real. Money's printed off paper. It comes from a central bank that is continuously printing money that is taxed to the people. The only reason why a monetary would shut down is if a nation shuts down. There is always going to be a flow of money. So money is not even an equation of is it affordable or is it a burden. It's just pushing to the side.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter.
Liam, can I respond?
Right, you guys want to respond? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to respond quickly by saying, actually, we do know the difference between economic migrants and refugees. And actually, in my speech, my only evidence is just regarding refugee populations. It's not regarding foreign talent. It's not regarding H-1B visas. It is exclusively regarding refugees. So let me just clarify that.
Okay, so a refugee is someone who's granted refugee status by a government, and I think one of the problems that we've had is that nobody can really tell when people are lying about whether they're a refugee or whether they're an economic migrant. And what we're trying to do is make a differentiate between the two, and then argue about one, because the motion's about refugees, not about economic migrants. And that's a really important thing to distinguish, which you're trying to make, but you can't tell, is what we're saying. There's often no way of telling.
So every statistic should be disregarded in this debate that's taken on whatever ostensibly is a refugee. Do you guys think that we should discount all pieces of evidence that say that they were taken or conducted on refugee populations?
I am not arguing we should disregard evidence.
Because, yeah, I understand that, but I just don't understand. I mean, so is no evidence valid because
yes,
no evidence knows what is because no evidence knows what a refugee is because that's what they're saying.
Okay. Someone from the audience, but move forward on the economics focus. On the economics focus. Someone move forward on the economics focus. Yes, the right.
One thing you haven't addressed is whether we should take in more refugees. And that's the crucial point. The whole
Hold on.
debate.
This is great. Hold it. Keep it. The economic. We're going to focus on the economics, but keep that for later. Keep that. The economic argument.
Yeah. Actually, I've been wondering that none of you really mentioned what a refugee is according to the Geneva Charter. Yeah. This is someone who is facing prosecution from the government. An Iraqi who is facing prosecution from ISIS is actually not a refugee. He can go to Baghdad or any ISIS-free zone.
Yes, absolutely right.
Okay, so that's the refugee definition. Can someone move us forward on the economic argument? Does the economic argument push us taking in more refugees or less? Yep.
I was reading in the press from Germany that of all the refugees they accepted, it was an extremely low number that got jobs, and they got jobs at DHL delivering packages. But it's just like in the single-digit percentages. So after a year, I wouldn't say they're giving much back as far as the economy goes. But this Jordan model that was mentioned over here, I think was quite interesting. I'd like to hear more about that economically, that they could do great things if they stay closer to home. But in Germany, they don't speak the language, they don't have any education, they don't have any certification. There's nothing they can actually do. Okay. We have to be prepared to pay for them.
Who wants to refute that? Who wants to refute that?
Okay, so there is a phenomenon called the complementary task specializations, which complementary task specializations.
Now we can understand.
You have to speak slow for him.
Okay, so this basically states that because there's a lot of fear that incoming immigrants or refugees will come in and take jobs. Well, this basically states that low-skilled workers will actually open up jobs for native lower-skilled workers who then are pushed up into the economy and the job market. And basically, the more immigrants you have into a society opens up more jobs because it doesn't compete, it's to complement. And
well, I didn't mention any competition. I just said there's not many of them got jobs at all, any skill level, zero skill level.
A lot of them cannot even read, to be honest.
They can't read.
They don't speak language.
They can't
read
speak.
Arabic.
Right? So that's a drain. That's like 1,000 or 1,500 euro a month per refugee in Germany. That's the cost. That's what it costs to keep them in there. So it'd be nice if they make 50 euro a week or something.
Yeah, sure. Complementary advantages is also known as comparative advantage. It relies upon people having different abilities and different costs. And if you have something like, say, a minimum wage, then the fact that someone is willing to work for much, much cheaper is completely irrelevant. If someone has no skills and them working for a wage that makes it worthwhile for someone to employ them is illegal, then it is impossible to employ them except as a form of charity which costs money.
Yeah.
Can I just again say, bring this back to my analogy, if these people are so great coming to countries and improving them so much, why can't we have them in countries like Jordan, where they could do with a helping hand, improve their economy? I don't understand what's wrong with that.
So sorry, I want to bring up that. How many people can Jordan take in?
We've already taken in a vast amount more than
That
we have.
doesn't answer the
And
question.
so has,
how many people can Jordan take in? If there's 4.5 and there's going to be more, we're talking 5-6 million refugees produced just specifically by the Syrian crisis. Which crisis is a euphemism, right? And if the UN estimates that there are 65 million refugees worldwide, displaced people, right? It's not just pursuit of political asylum. If you're displaced in the process of warfare and you have no home, who gives a shit about the definitions? You're a refugee. But how many people can Jordan in these special economic zones realistically take in? And can they take in everybody? And whether or not they can, does that negate the fact that the West should take in more?
Okay, first of all, I can say, Jordan can take in a lot of people, fair enough, but I can't give you a number. But what I can do is ask you, as the team that are proposing that the West should take in more, can you give me a number and how many more can we take? Because we're arguing essentially that what we're doing right now is, we could argue essentially that the rate at which we're taking in now is okay for us. But you're saying that the West should take in more refugees. So how many more?
Well,
how?
First of all,
and who?
You're not engaging the argument, first of all, that the West is largely responsible for the crisis. If neither of us have numbers,
I'm saying
politicians, not the people.
All right. They don't have numbers. We don't have numbers.
Maybe the Western
Jordan
countries are better because Western people make better
Jordan clearly
countries.
cannot absorb the amount of refugees that are being produced. That's obvious.
Who made
The
America
answer
great?
to the question of can Jordan absorb refugees or can the West? Obviously, the question is the West can absorb a shit ton more than Jordan can. Plus, they created the crisis in the first place. So, out of decency, accept refugees. If it's temporary,
for the future. Speaking about refugees, there are no refugees. There are maybe 5, 10, 20% refugees. The most of these people are fleeing from the economic situation in their country.
Exactly.
And they are not, according to the Geneva Convention, actually refugees.
Then they are not refugees, then they are not part of the topic.
Exactly.
They are illegal migrants.
Well, but they are always claiming they are refugees. That's the point.
They said law doesn't matter.
They're illegal migrants, which are coming from
We need to define what refugees.
regardless of the definition, we think the West should take in more.
Okay, so there's a bit of disagreement on the definition.
Who gives a shit?
I think everyone agrees what the definition of refugees is, but the debate is how much of the people that are moving are refugees or economic migrants. Okay, so that I leave with you guys to solve. Okay, who wants to move us forward? Someone's had his hand up for a while with glasses, yeah? It's you, sir. It's you.
So there's this constant insistence that the West caused the refugee crisis.
Yes.
But the refugees are grown with many countries. Syria is only one. And A, the degree to which the West is responsible for the crisis in Syria robs the people in that country of their own volition. But number two, a great many of the refugees come from places like Eritrea. Other than vague hand-waving about historical colonialism, how is the West to blame for the refugee crisis there? Why is it not due to the obnoxious government in that country?
This side, take that on.
It doesn't matter. So the fact that the the only reason this is a debate that we're having here is because of the shit that's happening in Syria. Let's all be real about that. This would never be a topic for discussion at an event like this if it wasn't for what's happening in Syria and the entire discourse around the refugee crisis. Secondly, if the people of Eritrea are oppressed by their own government, your idea that somehow the West's hands are clean in that, I'm pretty sure is wrong. But even then, the West has the capability. Accept more refugees.
If there's no West, there'd be no more.
Saudi Arabia had capability.
Huh?
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia should accept them too. So should China, so should Russia. That's not the fucking topic.
You're right.
Okay. take it on.
So it's always very interesting when people bring up the fact that migrants are going to come to our country and create jobs and just boost the economy. My argument would be, why do we need Syrian doctors more than Syria does? Another thing to say, it's absolutely fine. If you want to blame our government for everything that's responsible in the Middle East, that's
Not
fine.
everything.
I would say that the
dropping
issue
of
is much
bombs
more
on
complicated than
Syria.
that to simply just say that the West is responsible. Fine. Let's say the government's responsible. The government's responsible for everything in the Middle East, absolutely everything. Why is it the responsibility of individual European people to take on that burden of everything that comes after that? And that's another thing he said. It seems to be that whenever we do something, it's never enough. And then when we don't do something, it's not enough. So we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't.
So damn us.
Okay. I'm going to take a point from you guys and then move on to the new section, yep?
Because you keep mentioning this, this duty Western countries have because they are responsible for all of that. Who do you think is arming ISIS, Al-Nusra, and all those terror groups? It's mostly, it's Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And they didn't take any refugees, so why do you think they shouldn't? They are also responsible for the current crisis. But please answer my question. Don't say it doesn't matter, because this matters.
Who disabled the government of Iraq?
What are the people of Syria responsible for? What are the people of Syria responsible for? Nothing?
Okay.
This guy brought up their own.
Let's hold. Somebody move us forward on this topic.
Little pause.
You wouldn't make that argument in the context of World War II with Jewish people taking refuge. You wouldn't say that an advocacy that says you should accept refuge and not turn those refugees away like the West largely did, which led to the slaughter of 6 million people. You would never make the argument. None of you would make the argument that we don't know how to define refugees. None of you would make the argument that denies Jewish people their own volition. You would, but that would just be a bullshit troll response. That's not true.
Now you are comparing the concentration camps with the situation in Syria. And that is not true. That is completely unacceptable. That's completely unacceptable.
Bunch of immigrants in a room going crazy. Okay, let's somebody take on this. Move us a bit
If I
forward.
would be a Jew, I would be kicking you out.
Nobody would make that argument then. Nobody would make that argument then.
We're jumping around different time zones. Who is responsible? We'll talk about what should be done, but who is responsible for the war in Syria and the displaced people across the Middle East? And who is mostly responsible for this? Who wants to take
U.S. government of corrupt regions themselves.
Yeah, I consider Obama responsible for that because before,
Obama, sure.
Sure, yeah.
Therefore, but something disagree with her on that. Before
Okay, great. Obama's responsible. West should take it.
Okay, before 2008, there's no ISIS.
Huh?
Before 2008, there's no ISIS in Iraq. They've been defeated.
Okay, so George Bush had nothing to do with this. Is that
Well,
your position?
That's actual liberation.
That's not your
liberation.
position. So let's move on.
Okay. Final point of responsibility, then we move on.
Just on the point of responsibility, these guys, and just directly to address you, even if we admit, that we might have some responsibility, my point directly to you was I have a way of solving this that we should try and invest in, and you have just dismissed it. So I'm asking you, this isn't about motion, there is a way of solving this, that even if we agree to this thing, if you're saying that we're responsible for everything, that doesn't change the fact that we solved the problem in one way and not the other.
Okay. Okay. Bit of quiet. Right, I'm going to move us on to a new section, but keep all your ideas in your head, keep your hands up. What about, so, we've talked about responsibility. I want to talk about what is best for, we've touched on it already, but I want to push further. What is best for the West? So ignoring the refugees and their needs for this part of the debate, what is best for the West? We've spoken about economic benefits or harm the refugees can impact. What about the cultural and the other impacts that refugees have? How does that benefit the West or does it not benefit the West? So we move forward with that. Chap with long hair.
both sides' ideas on, okay, A, what is the West, and B, what levels of responsibility do countries in the West have? I mean, I would say the level of responsibility of New Zealand is far different to that of the United States. If I could just get both sides' points of view on the different levels of responsibility in the West.
It's a good question, but I think we've done responsibility to death by now. Let's keep on the topic of how does it impact the West, being completely selfish from the West perspective. So how does it impact the West? Is it good or bad for the West refugee immigration?
There's a recent U.S. Department of Defense study released as part of litigation release freedom of information. It's called The Future of Europe, and it talks about the future of Europe. One of the things in it is about how European demographics affects their economic and demographic future. And the thing is that Muslim populations have overwhelmingly lower educational achievements than native populations. First generation people have lower crime rates than natives, and all their workforce participation is almost as high as natives. Second generation and further, they assimilate, but they do to a certain extent economically, but they do not assimilate to a uniform extent. Overwhelmingly, it's lower middle class to underclass, people who usually do not get university degrees, usually do not become skilled workers. These are people who assimilate to the part of the population which is a net negative economically. Taxpayers pay for their health care and their education and everything else that they get, and overwhelmingly these people do not contribute to the exchequer as much as they take out.
Okay, so your overall point is a net loss economically. Does anyone want to move forward on the economics and the social side? Yeah?
The thing is, because in Germany the social welfare is extremely high, one of the best in the world. And once the people are recognized as refugees, they have the same rights as any other German. And now the thing is, we have really fucked infrastructure, bridges, streets, universities, whatever. And the thing is, we also have a lot of old people living at the brink of poverty. They don't have enough money, and at the same time refugees who never contributed anything into the system have the same rights. I mean, excuse me, that's not fair. And the point is, we have a lot of people in Germany addressing this problem, and then a lot of people label those people as racists, Islamophobic, whatever. You don't listen to them because you don't like this problem, because it's not PC. And this is the reason why those people vote for Trump, Le Pen, Wilders, whatever. Because your arrogance is blinding you.
Okay, can someone refute that? Someone who disagrees with that sentiment? Disagreement, yeah?
At least a little bit. I would say I agree that it's unfair that refugees get the same amount of welfare than average citizen from the start up, because that's just not how it should work. But in the general, I think a refugee can contribute positive to the economy of most Western states. Because when we look at the economical structure of Western states nowadays, we see following. We have a lot of people being in high educated jobs because the education systems in those countries are mostly pretty good. So we have a lot of people contributing in really high paid industrial or digitalized jobs, which is actually not work anymore when you say it, like not hard labor work. So the refugees which come into a country are not that well educated, they will never be. I would not disagree with anyone saying this. But they will fill the spots of those people we are not having, because nobody wants to do the stupid gardener jobs anymore, because the people having a university degree will not go and say, oh, I have a university degree in physics, I'm going to do gardener now. So we will have
Final few points on the impacts on the West.
So just to retort what he was saying, essentially these jobs don't exist anymore. Well, with the imminent fourth industrial revolution, there are not going to be any jobs. Exactly. In the sense of people aren't going. There's not going to be a person, doing your garden if you have a garden. So you have to be a machine doing it. So the argument of people coming in and getting these low-skilled jobs is just maybe in the short term, maybe 2-3 years, but after that, then there's not really any jobs left. And so the economic argument is not really. I think it's outdated because you got to look at the diminishing value of labor. So labor isn't valuable in
Those
near
jobs
future.
are for the youth, the young people to come up and to get those jobs.
But they're not going to have them.
They're not going to have them.
They're not going to have those jobs either.
Okay.
So I think this needs to be part of the argument because you're talking about more than a 2-year time frame. You're talking about the future, and if you are, then you need to pay attention to the bigger picture, and which is the massive unemployment that might be
Okay, so what is long-term, not as economically beneficial because of the way the market is changing. You, sir.
What about working towards citizenship? Look, it's a complicated issue. The idea of who has a right to what and for what reason in a place at a time. It's complex, and I do side a lot with, I guess, this side that should someone show up on day one and then be treated as somebody who spent their life paying into a system? I'm not convinced, but what about with exceptions? What about someone comes in and works their way into citizenship? What about someone comes in and says, hey look, we've got all these infrastructure problems, we need bridge repair, and it's really hard to find people who are willing to work for a wage that we're willing to pay. So take refugees who are very willing to work for a wage that is far better than what they're being paid at home.
Minimum wage laws.
Well, hang on. It's a complicated issue, but I'm saying, laws aside, let's tackle the problem as if it's new. Let's make the laws as if we're trying to solve a problem. Except it doesn't need us anywhere. We need to give them a caveat on the cultural and after. Look, I know the hand raising may be new, but give it a second. We allow people in with a set of laws that benefits them and the country they're going to. After X number of years, apply for citizenship. After X number of years, then minimum wage laws apply. Why can't we do both? Why can't we have people repairing our infrastructure? Why can't we accept people who will be working for a higher wage than they're earning? It's a win-win.
But also if those people also respect the local laws.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to do a bit more freestyle in a moment. So that's the impact on the West. Now, let's forget about the West and focus on the refugees themselves. We have talked about this a lot already. We have some ideas already, but what is the best for the refugees? What do they want and what is best for the refugees? Who wants to take this on the front liner? Elena.
So I think a lot of